I guess my next question would then be, I remember back in the day going to seek out hypnotherapy to try and manage trauma. And one of the things he said to me was that because the trauma was so deep rooted, it would be quite difficult for the hypnotherapy to actually get me out of that space. So what are your views on that, and how many, like, say, sessions or things, sorry, I say sessions because I don't actually know what they would be called, would it take to um, get it solidified into you? Or is that just varied between person to person, or what does it actually look like?
This is something, you're on a really interesting subject for me. I would love to make a documentary about this because again, this is an area of deep controversy. This is why there is controversy around hypnosis and trauma. So there is a protocol, a very revolutionary protocol called the Visual-Kinesthetic Dissociation protocol. It was developed in the 70s, 80s, and it's part of modern NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And it is often used by hypnotists. When somebody comes to you with a trauma and they know what it is and they can feel it, you can often use this protocol to, I would say, solve, heal, discharge, there's different terms for it, that trauma very quickly, sometimes in 1 or 2 sessions. That's it. And it is very fast. Again, some people don't like that because they're like, no, you should go to talk therapy for 3 years. But I personally, again, I think the beginning of our conversation was sort of this idea. The reason why people are afraid of therapy is especially I'd say in the UK, is this sort of perception that it's a long, drawn out process without clear sense of whether you're going to have success or not.
I
Well,
think
I
just
tell
to add
people
to
in my
that,
work,
sorry, just to add to that,
go
I
ahead.
think it's also the not just it not working, but the having to divulge into vulnerability, I would say, is
Right,
quite
you're right.
a key thing
Yes,
as well.
yes. I think you're right. That's a big part of it too. There's some controversy around this because some people think, uh, trauma is not an everyday thing. Not people who are not trauma specialists shouldn't be doing trauma. But when people are troubled in life, so I'm talking about people that are just experiencing kind of wounded states, or they are anxious, or or they're affected by their traumas. They have what's called undischarged trauma. This comes from Peter Levine, somatic trauma therapy. So so the reason why that is that if you experience a traumatic event in your life, what your unconscious mind seeks to do is it actually tries to get rid of that trauma. So I'll give you an example. It's useful from the animal world because we can understand these things. You are a antelope and you're attacked by a leopard. Somehow you survive, but the leopard almost kills you, but you survive. So now you are traumatized by leopards. If I say the word leopard, if I mention a leopard or I bring leopard to your mind, you re-enter a traumatized state because you almost died. You go back to the original trauma. This makes you anxious, nervous, you can't focus, you can't concentrate. This explains why traumatized children do badly in school, because they can't pay attention, because their brain is somewhere else. Um, my point, sorry, where's my point here is that um, that wouldn't it make sense to try to resolve these things easily and quickly if you could? And this protocol really can. Like, I've done it many times. Many other hypnotists, NLP specialists do this all the time with people, and they de-traumatize people really quickly. And I personally think our culture needs it. There's so much trauma, I think, coming down the pipe with climate change and political crises that we need. People are not going to have 3 years to figure out their traumas. Why not figure it out right away?
I
Um,
do have to agree with you, because I swear we live in such a fast-paced world as it is. So why not be fast-paced where it matters? And it's not necessarily like rushing through it. It sounds like what you're saying is really you're going to identify the triggers from that point and then work with those triggers to redirect them. I've discovered this quite a little bit after doing lots of therapy. Now I'm at the point where I don't need to know where it's come from or look back so far to understand it, because I realize I could just keep going down there and keep going down there. now, if I'm looking forward, I just need to know what it is and how it's affecting my day to day, which really is going to be the triggers.
I think you're right. And by the way, I think you mentioned that when you had an experience, the therapist said that your trauma is so deep.
Too
Not
deep
sure if you can
rooted,
get into
yeah.
it. When people learn these techniques, they often are told you need to get to the root, and there's an appeal to try to get to the root trauma. Because sometimes I think that is a thing that people
Mm,
have originating traumas in their lives that then color their worlds. If
mm,
you could get to the root of it, it's almost as if you can, and I have seen this happen where you can just, you essentially get rid of that entire trauma and it's gone. It no longer affects the
mm,
person. But sometimes things happen in early childhood, or the person, for other reasons, can't remember or doesn't know what the trauma
mm,
is. But that's why we have this expression, first or worst. First or worst means, was it, if we can remember the first trauma, great. But now, how does it manifest into your life in the worst ways?
mm,
Well, I was at a cocktail party and suddenly I couldn't breathe and I was having a panic attack. Well, there's your
mm,
trauma. And
yeah.
that was your kind of worst experience of it. And so we can work with that. And that at
Mm,
least is a starting point. And so I would say I would never say to somebody, your trauma is so deep, I don't know what to do. I would just say,
yeah.
we got to start somewhere else. And
Mm.
uh, yeah, I don't know if that's helpful, but
I think, yeah, massively, and I think that probably reflects a little bit in regards to maybe the UK v the US a little bit in treatment procedures.
where they would be like, we must get to the,
In the sense that they've said, oh, okay, well, it's a bit too deep rooted, it's just going to keep coming back up, so you have to get to it. Whereas what we're talking about now is, okay, well, where's the effect here and now, that even though it trails back down to those places, if we could figure out the effect it's having on you here and now, that's going to be the thing that's going to be resolved. So it doesn't necessarily matter too much where it's come from, as long as you can kind of divert it in the now.
you know what's really important about this? I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think you're totally right. First of all, there is a way to heal trauma. And but what's really important is is a lot of people are walking around wounded. A lot of people are walking around
Mm,
repressing their traumas, thinking that there's no real solution or there's no practical solution.
mm,
And I think that what you've got to know is that there are better and better methods. I think the rise of somatic trauma therapy, of trauma informed therapy, all these things, I think there's a lot of, and I also think that hypnotherapy and NLP offers these sort of faster approaches
mm,
and more practical approaches. And when I see, I've been learning this. I actually, it's funny. I'm part of a group called Healing the Healer Initiative, which actually is hypnotherapists working on each other. And it was really interesting for me. The idea was, should we be healing people if we ourselves are not healed? Which is a really good
mm,
question. But what I saw in doing this was, I sort of saw that healing trauma is a little bit about initiative and a little bit about opportunity. Meaning, if you don't
mm,
know of any way to sort of resolve your traumas, you're going to assume I'm stuck with them, unless you're kind of really working on your stuff. There's also this cynical belief that people don't get better. But I am here to say, I've seen so many people get better. I've seen people
mm,
resolve phobias, lifelong phobias. I've seen people, and I myself, I have trauma from being a newspaper reporter, and I got better. I mean, that's the whole reason I got into
mm,
hypnosis, was that I had traumas and they got better really quickly. And I was like, whoa, I got to learn how to do this. That's how I started.
mm,
And so, again, I don't know why the public doesn't know more about this. I would just say there doesn't seem to be a social interest in true healing.
mm. I would say, you know what it makes me think? It makes me think that, well, half the things people know from what they can see and what's directly in front of them. And I don't think hypnosis really is directly in front of a lot of people as a solution. And it's kind of like that typical like you could grow up in a certain environment and never see, I don't know, a Ferrari, for example, and so you'll never know that that's a possibility. And that's such a mundane example, but like you never know that that's a possibility of something you can have because you don't see it and it doesn't exist. If you've never met a lawyer, you might not ever know that there's a possibility that you could become a lawyer, because you might be surrounded by people who have not healed from their trauma. You would just assume that that is life, like, and this is our new state that we all learn how to operate from, which is dreadful and exhausting. But if people
I
don't see it and don't know, they don't know.
I would take it a step further. That one of the clearer explanations is that the cultural, legal, financial system benefits from the belief that trauma is not resolvable. And I'll give you a really clear example. So this is more of an American phenomenon, but in America, there's lawsuits right and left. People fall down the stairs at work or have an experience, they sue their employer, and they're then usually on the radio saying, I had this crazy experience and now I'm traumatized for life. That's the cliche, traumatized for life. And that's because the belief was, because when trauma was first seen and understood, usually through shell shock in World War I, World War II is when they really started to get a handle on. They saw that people were permanently psychologically changed by the trauma they experienced on the battlefield. That this cliche arose that people are all traumatized for life because generally people didn't get better, but they also didn't have treatments, or effective ones. So they would perform lobotomies or electroshock and make it worse. So there's a cliche. And lawyers in America in particular have a financial interest in suggesting that trauma is not resolvable so that the damages are bigger. They don't want to
Yeah.
say, so yeah, you had this bad experience. Well, why don't you just go and see if you can heal it? No,
Mm,
my client is permanently damaged. They need
yeah.
$500,000. And that is one of the reasons why people don't know more about trauma treatment.
Yeah, and I think like what you were saying about the World War, it's really, I feel like trauma, if you think about it back then, it's probably developed into a bit more of a buzzword that people just throw around for whatever reason, like you're saying, greed of certain things or whatnot. But I think genuinely, if someone is experiencing real trauma, nobody wants to stay there. If you've experienced real trauma, you don't want to stay there. You're going to do whatever you can to try get out of it. And a lot of the time you don't really know how to. But I mean, I know we do kind of live a little bit in a society of people who just give up, but genuinely I think you're not going to be sitting there broadcasting it. You're just going to be trying to work your way out of it. But it definitely has been diluted over the years, I think, in regards to those words.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also even restrictions around in different modalities whether you're even allowed to use the term sometimes. I mean, I come at things a bit as a filmmaker reporter, and that's why I think there's a great story here, which is that there are amazing in the US. There was a big fuss, a controversy that hit the Washington Post, I believe, where they found out the US military knew that it could use there's a thing called the RTM protocol, which is not exactly hypnotherapy, but it's based on a similar system that resolves trauma very quickly. And they found out that the US military knew that this system worked, that had an extremely high success rate, and yet they chose these ineffectual long-term systems for treating trauma among their own veterans. And it's exactly, anyways, a famous American public figure wrote an article about it saying, what's going on? What is going on? We know how, we are now much better at treating these things. People can get better. And I think, you know, you were saying, like, you made a good point where you're saying people who experience genuine trauma are not going to want to live in it for long or be in it. And well, there's a simple explanation. I mean, one of the definitions, and I think there is some gray area here, is that trauma, by definition, is an encounter with death, meaning your own, sometimes, or with annihilation. So that's why being assaulted or something like that is traumatic, because you're experiencing something where you feel like you're going to be annihilated or might get annihilated. And so the unconscious seizes on it and goes,
Mm,
this must never happen again. And it reminds you, this is bad. This must not happen. But because
mm,
you are not able to heal and you're not able to talk about it and you're not dealing with it, it locks down in the unconscious.
mm,
And then the unconscious then goes, okay, I can't discharge the state. I can't get rid of it. I have to be on permanent alert warning
mm,
of this state. What it then does is it wakes for a safe time. So it goes, oh, your life has gotten a little bit better. You're in a new relationship.
mm.
Maybe now the trauma can come up, and it bubbles the trauma up. So,
Yeah.
and it's just basically it's trying to get rid of it. And so then you're in a social situation and suddenly you're triggered and you're in a traumatic state. What do? You don't go into catharsis and resolve it. You just try your best to repress it again. And you give
Mm.
yourself a medal for having repressed that traumatic memory.
I do think
And
that
you
is
are
generally
proud.
yeah, and I do generally think that is the way that people manage it. I've realised that trauma is just it's it's about firstly knowing yourself and then having the tools to help you get out of that. People are quite capable of if they put their mind to it. I've done the repressing thing for so long. It then bubbles up in unwanted ways. And I think you are completely right. You'll get into a safe, comfortable position and place, and then it'll rear its head again because you've put yourself into a vulnerable position, and that's going to fire up your survival mind and whatnot, and it's going to go into action. But what I think most people tend to, or what I did at least, and I see people around me doing, is they get into the uncomfortable feeling, experience that, and then, like you say, regress or revert back to that state instead of pushing forward and believing that they are capable and able to move past that pain. And it doesn't seem to be something that people can just do or not do. I do kind of believe it's something that people can practice and learn, like a skill, like building a muscle.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it's funny how we're right on this. This is such a good subject. I mean, the question is, can people really heal? And
Mm,
the answer has to be. I mean, I've just seen it. The answer is yes. People
mm,
really can heal, and
I agree.
because I've experienced it, and I've also seen it in my work many times. Um, but and I can also explain it. I mean, here's the explanation as clear as I can make it. When you have a trauma or a terrible memory, your unconscious tags it. And it's interesting what you
Mm,
said. We gave the two most common examples of how trauma kind of reasserts itself. One is when you feel safe, because
mm,
that's the unconscious mind going, okay, maybe finally now I can discharge it. And two, the other time is when something is similar to the original traumatic event. So
mm,
you had a certain kind of trauma, and then there's a similar, let's say you're hit by a car and then you almost get hit by a car. Well, that's a lot similar. And now you go back into traumatic state. When you go back into traumatic state, that is an opportunity to discharge the trauma.
mm,
It sounds kind of scary, but that's what a lot of movies are about, where people somehow go back to the thing that wounded them. This should be a bigger deal in our society. We should have more understanding and interest in what goes on here. And the way that people often resolve it is they go back and they are given the safety and comfort and support to fully go through the process. And I think this is why crying is so important. I started a new group. I do this thing called craffing. Craffing stands for crying and laughing. And that's because I noticed that when you cry, sometimes you laugh, and sometimes when you laugh, you cry. And there's something in the middle there. There's actually a third state. I've noticed, because I've done this with groups where we're crying and laughing at the same time, and we're all crying and laughing. And I'm like, it's a weird feeling, this thing in between. Craffing is one of the states which allows you to kind of shake off or discharge trauma.
mm.
Wild animals are always discharging trauma. It happens in the
Oh,
natural world all the time. So why can't we do it? And the reason we can't do it is because we repress our feelings so much. We're so good at repressing
mm,
them. And And hypnosis just gives us the opportunity to also simulate. So let's say all your life you've been bullied, and the bullies always make you feel traumatized and small. Well, in hypnosis, you go into trance and you throw the bully into the river. You know,
Mm.
you didn't really throw the bully into the river, which would be a criminal offense. You did it kind of internally in a way that makes your unconscious feel better, and now the bully is gone.
Mm.
So one of the advantages of hypnosis is to create simulations that are healing.
Mm. And that brings me back to the point of not really seeing and knowing. If you can create that simulation within that safe space, then you could kind of reprogram it to see a better outcome, or the place and position that you'd prefer to be into.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other
Wow.
kind of hypnosis, which is visualization. Yes, yeah,
Yes.
and the sort of the idea that we visualize or see all our outcomes, negative or positive. This is why I do movie therapy. I
Mm.
notice that people that have troubling lives are always visualizing dark futures,
Mm.
often dreary, often black and white. That's how they see their lives. So arguably, we are also, there's a theory that we're only manifesting things that we've already kind of visualized one way or the other. So why
Mm.
wouldn't you want to change that? Why wouldn't you try to work on
Mm.
more celebratory, positive, enlightened visualization?
Oh, gosh, yeah, just so true. And it just does make me think that it is possible for everyone. So that's really reassuring. Um, I just realised we've been talking for a very long time now. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have something else to say. Yeah, yeah.
it's been really, really wonderful. Picking your brains and bringing all this stuff that isn't necessarily out there to the surface, which I think is very helpful. And yeah, just it's nice to hear, especially the fact that it's all possible and it's all within our grasps. Um,
It's interesting that we fell into that. I think that was a really good. I didn't. I think it just kind of. I think it's a really interesting issue. Like, um,
mm,
that healing is possible. People need to know that healing is possible, and and so let's not walk, because whatever hurt people.
yeah.
Let's not walk around wounded if we can avoid it.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true. I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to do a podcast, because I really just want people to know that we can get better, we can make a change, and we can
Yeah,
have this positive impact. And there are also, I really had a lack of realizing that there was people out there with the same kind of mindset, people who could see that other side and were able to help you get there. And I think it's just incredible, the fact that I will be able to put this out there in the world and it'll be accessible to people who maybe have the similar kind of feelings and experiences. I was going to say, before we finish, it'd be quite interesting to just hear a little bit about your documentary that you are in the middle of making, or film rather.
it's a crazy sounding documentary. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's this sort of weird. So within hypnosis, there's a bunch of weird phenomena. And one of the things that people have observed over the years, so it started as a stage hypnosis thing, a phenomena where you would go to a stage hypnosis show, and at the end of the show, the stage hypnotist would often say, "I'm going to shake your hand. These are the volunteers that are on stage, and they're doing, they've been turned into chickens and they do crazy things. When I shake your hand, you're going to have a huge orgasm." And this was like a stunt, and it would people would sort of flail around and scream. And so I remember seeing this maybe 12 years ago in Las Vegas, and I thought, is this real? Like, are
Hmm.
they really, are these, or is it just theatricality? Is it people being, you're telling me to sort of do something theatrically and I'm doing it? So I, explored this with a workshop situation where we carefully asked people's consent, and we did it but we also explored the incredible potential, where we saw that not only could people be hypnotized to have powerful orgasms, that it broke the rules of sexuality.
Hmm.
One, people could have multiple orgasms. They could have orgasms about anything they wanted. Plus, there we found that there was all these sort of interesting aspects of orgasmic behavior where, for example, gender didn't really matter. Women could have orgasms as men, men could have orgasms as women if they were in trance. Um, I've developed this thing called the flattergasm, which is the idea that you can flatter someone to orgasm. And at the moment of orgasm, you give them a really beautiful compliment. And the idea of it is that orgasm itself is probably a highly suggestible state. So if you compliment somebody right at the moment of orgasm, they experience it deeply. If it's an appropriate compliment, I would say. So I'm working on this documentary called Make Orgasms Not War, which is based on one of the main characters in the film who is a peace activist, where there's a bunch of research showing that there's a correlation or a connection between sexual frustration in a culture and its warlike nature. Not only sexual frustration, and even worse than that some of the worst people in the world, by that I mean people like serial killers, obviously, but also school shooters, mass murderers, are driven by or affected by sexual frustration. There's a big connection.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, meaningful sexual lives. Almost, I'll give you the example. So there's a guy, sort of an American professor, who's followed almost every mass shooter, serial killer. All these guys, and they're usually men, always complain about being sexually frustrated or women not liking them, or there might be very good reasons because they're scary stalker type people, but that is a factor. One of the underpinning factors that they are alienated from people, they're socially maladaptive, and also sexually frustrated. In the real term, everybody can probably get access to porn, but these people can't have they don't have a healthy access to other people. And so part of the thinking in the film was that this is a different model for sexuality. It suggests that it's more flexible. People think of sexuality as inflexible. We just get our sexuality and that's it. Two, that sexuality is actually really comes from the brain. Now, why does that matter? You would be like, well, I kind of thought that, but no, in our culture, we think it really comes from sex organs, like kind of a deep unconscious thing we don't know. And if you're getting your sexuality from your sex organs, there's no agency, you have no control. So what the film suggests is that we have way more control than we think. We could use hypnotic principles to really get a lot of control and have some agency over where our sexuality is going. Plus, help people heal the dysfunction, woundedness that is also part of sexual behavior. So that's why it's called Make Orgasms Not War. It's coming out like later in 2025.
Okay, wonderful.
And we try to explain the whole thing.
I look forward to watching it because it does sound, it feels like you are really opening up the societal norms to all of this information and bringing in new helpful understandings. So yeah, I look forward to watching this.
I hope that's true. Yeah,
it definitely is. It 100% is true. I've got you on social media, so I am like literally the most scattiest person. I try not to be, but I just am by nature because I like to go with my flow, So, but I've got you on social media, so I will look out for posts and marketing in relation to it.
The last thing I was going to say is that I'm half joking, but it might be true. We might change the name because we find out that, I found out the hard way that you can't even use the word orgasm on social media without getting into trouble. But we'll see. But right now, that's what it's called.
It has been really, really lovely talking to you. It really has. You're such an insightful person, and I really appreciate all the knowledge that you have given me here today. And thank you for joining me on my podcast journey.
I think it went to a really good place for me anyways. This sort of healing angle I think is really interesting and should be interesting to just about anybody.
I'm pretty sure people are going to be able to get a lot. I know I definitely have got a lot from this. So yeah, it's everything. It should come out in January. That is my plan. So I will keep you posted and
okay, good.
Let you know.
I'll see you around somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully we have some more talks in the future.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you as well. I hope you have a lovely evening. I'll talk to you soon.
That's just how we do.